Hi everybody, how are you doing? Good? Waiting for lunch? My name is Jonatan Lundin. I am really excited to be here to talk to you today. And I'm going to talk to you how to turn your legacy book content into a mobile-friendly, faceted knowledge base. So what is that? Before we start, I would just like to introduce myself. So I am from Sweden. I am a technical communicator, just like most of you. How many of you are technical communicators? Okay, good. I've worked almost 20 years as a technical communicator, mostly with XML-based content management. I started off with HTML back in the days. I have a position as an information architect at a company called Excosoft, which is a software provider. We have a CCMS system called Scribenta, which is used by industrial companies in Northern Europe. I'm going to use Scribenta and its add-on Finder today to demonstrate the principles behind creating this web knowledge base. I have some background in the development of the DITA standard. I little bit participated in development of 1.2, and I'm going to relate to DITA in this presentation where I find it to be relevant. Actually, I work as an information architect part-time. I'm also an industrial PhD student. I'm studying information-seeking behaviors, trying to understand how users using technology search for information when they get stuck for some reason. So knowledge about user behavior, I believe, is really, really important for us technical communicators to understand when designing and planning technical documentation. And for me, it's also valid knowledge when looking into designing tools for technical communicators. So I'm going to use some of the research results in this presentation. I'm not going to be too academic or theoretical, I promise. It's a practical session. And as a spin-off of this research, I'm working with a methodology called SESAM, which stands for Search Situation Architecture and Methodology, which targets information architects or information designers, if you like, when planning and designing how to deliver technical documentation for the searching user. Okay, great. Before we look into the agenda, I would just like to actually show you what I mean by a web knowledge base. What is it? And this is, I'm using the Scribenta web knowledge base as an example here. And previously we had documentation for the system as traditional PDF manuals. Then we deploy them to a single point of entry, a website basically. And these manuals, they are managed as XML files in the CCMS system, traditionally, with reuse and variables and all that part. But they are then deployed directly to an online or offline server. And as you can see here, this is targeting mobile devices, so this is the size of a tablet. And of course, if I would select this is responsive design and built on a lot of web technology. So let's keep the iPad size for now. In this web knowledge base, there is no book content. There is no static table of contents or traditional books. Instead, it contains a number of answers to a number of user questions. And we use taxonomies to classify these answers. So the taxonomies here are the backbone of the information architecture, the web knowledge base. And there is basically three ways a user can find an answer. There's faceted navigation, faceted search, or bottom-up navigation following links. And I'd just like to show you what these three, so you get an idea what they are. So let's assume that, let's look into faceted navigation first. Let's assume that you are a technical writer who are new to the system and you would like to get some answers on what Scribenta, the product, is all about. In this case, you would start by selecting some values in any facet. For instance, you are a technical writer. I hope you can see at the back. You can see? Okay, perfect. Probably you will select that you're maybe a beginner. You have a type of question which is learn, and then you could explore these areas. So as I do a number of selection in these facets, I get a panel stream of answers, which is, of course, related to the selection I've made. So I create my own sort of mini manual. By selecting a number of facet values, I zoom into the knowledge base. I define my search situation, who I am. And these filters are also dynamic, so certain values here are grayed out. And this is to indicate that if you click there will be 0 result. And this, I think, is the power with faster navigation, to help the user to avoid getting 0 results. Now these grayed out values can either be hidden or shown as grayed out here. You see that this is different in different sizes. And sort of zooming into the content, and as you click, you zoom into, you get fewer and fewer answers. It's also proven to be motivate people to continue to search. So you get a scent for the information in that sense. And of course, you can, expand these answers and explore. But let me reset and show the other way. If we start from faceted search. So I would type a keyword and I get some result. And of course, I can filter this result list, and I can even then so faceted search is starting by searching and then filtering the result list. And the third approach, bottom-up navigation following links, is basically the principle that a user is finding an answer and reading the content. Probably ask follow-up questions. So asking a question, finding something is like a chain reaction. You find something, ask a new question. You want to explore the information environment. So in this case, we could use links, of course, as a way to help the user find answers to follow-up questions. And these links can be created in many ways. So if I click here in this environment, I actually I can find the answer, I get back, and then I can sort of, okay, how do you organize? Aha, okay. And I can actually then continue to explore by following links like this. So and get back. And I'm still on the same page. So this would be suitable to small screens and small devices. And links here can be traditional cross-reference links. Can also be related. You can classify a certain phrase to a number of values in these taxonomies. So when I follow a link, I see all the answers that has a particular classification, so soft linking. So these are the basic approaches of finding an answer. So there's no static content in a sense. So usually I create my own mini manual, my own content that I need in my search situation. Now there you see there's a number of other tabs here. I can actually select guided version here, which is basically that I can create a wizard that helps the user, guides the user to a workflow. And I can also actually publish the traditional manuals, but I'm going to focus on the taxonomies and the filters in this presentation. Okay. So let's look into the agenda. I would like to start by just recapping of what is the current way of delivering technical documentation today. And then discuss some of the issues, concerns that SE also is available in research with the current way of delivering technical documentation. And continue to shortly discuss what are the expectations of users tomorrow. And then wrap it up and show how can we get from where we are today creating this more dynamic information environment, this web knowledge base, without restructuring or rewriting content heavily or forcing you to chop up your content into topics. Because that is the experience that I have talking to companies that they have a lot of technical documentation which they have invested in over the years. And they want to create web knowledge base as a new output delivery, but without starting from scratch. So I'm going to show you how this can be done. Okay, so what is the current way of delivering technical documentation today? And I usually talk about the book paradigm. Companies, they have, of course, a content management process, maybe a content management system, which they have invested a lot in. And the output to users is books, PDFs, which has a static content. If it's HTML or CHM or Wiki, it can still be considered to be the book paradigm. Content is following the data map or the structure that is organized in the FrameMaker file. And this is not necessarily a bad approach. All of our customers are also doing this. So this needs to be available, and many users appreciate this kind of content. But we see that there is sort of a shift, a change. And this is maybe due to some of the problems that we see. I guess you're a technical communicator, so this is something that you probably discuss a lot. Users avoid manuals. Ooh. Is that true, or what do you think? Exactly, it's not black or white. Depends on the context, situation, user. There's many factors that, so this is a little bit provocative, of course, just to keep you awake. We have a user who is having an information need, is asking a question, and think about the user manual as something that is difficult to use, difficult to search, especially if I have a preference for using small devices, using many PDFs, of course, well, this is. And there is some research that tries to explain, some research has come to the conclusion that in many contexts users avoid manuals if there are other information sources available that the user perceives to be more accessible. There's something called the information source selection behavior. It says that we judge which information source we go to. And we use a number of criteria to do that, and accessibility is an important such criteria. So this means to us technical communicators that one challenge is how can we design technical documentation to increase the perceived accessibility, so design for findability. And this is a challenge. I'm not saying that I have all the answers, but I said this is something that we need to look into. And this is sort of confirmed in a recent study. So this was a study performed this year, 300 content professionals around the globe. It was the Center for Information Development Management, together with DCL, I think it was. And over 70% of these 300 content professionals said that their customers wanted content that is more searchable. It says possibly using faceted search. So this could be an evidence that users out there, they do expect to get something additional to the traditional books. So what do we need to know to sort of satisfy these users? And from my point of view, I think it's really, really important that we need to start to understand user behavior. That is so essential. In my case, I'm focusing on information seeking behavior. I thought just to give you a short summary of my view of what that is. So we have a user who is using an industrial product or a consumer gadget, and at some point gets stuck for some reason, could be many reasons. This user is perceiving uncertainty. This uncertainty can be turned into an information need. An information need can be expressed as one or several questions. Users here most users are active, goal-oriented. And for those of you who are into minimalism, you know that users assimilate prior knowledge when trying to create a mental model to figure out how to act. And once we have sort of expressed a question, we try to find the answer. And here, this information source selection behavior comes into play. That we select an information source which we perceive is accessibility seems to be one criteria that is very important. So what does that mean for us technical communicators? Users are active, goal-oriented, they ask a number of questions, they select the information source that they perceive is accessible. If we turn it to our challenge, what do we need to do? And I often say that what we do is predict user questions. That is what technical communicators are doing. And predicting user questions and writing the answers, then we also need to make a way to make answers easy to find, to make the information or the manual knowledge base attractive, to be selected. So that is a challenge that I often talk to technical communicators about. How can we predict user questions? And we need to predict, since we often work in parallel to product development. There's no users, the product has not been launched to the market, there's no users. And the predictive approach is sort of different to the reactive approach, which support engineers and sales and marketing people. They react to real user questions. So if you think about it, we predict and they react. We can have a way to talk to each other. I'm not going to dig into all these details. If you want to read some more, I have a recent article in the ISDC Communicator on designing for findability. And this, you can find it on the web link here. I can send it to you, of course, no problem. But let's just look into what are the ways to making answers easy to find. How can we do it? So let's assume here that you would deploy all your technical documentation to an online server and the user will access from a tablet. And what kind of content, how would content look like on this tablet? Well, as I showed you, one example in the web knowledge base is that it contains basically the predicted answers. So it's a long pile of answers, a number of user questions, which has been predicted. There's no hierarchy, no organization here. It's just a big pile. And the title here is expressed as the user's question. And I know some, when I'm presenting this, some, oh, but we can't put the user's question in the title. That is sort of orthodox. But there's some research that suggests that content is easier to find if title is expressed as the user's question. So it's really user-centered. Now, providing a long list here, there could be thousands of answers, and this could be equal to a data topic. So in this case, a data topic is the answer to a user question. And by the way, this long pile of things here, you could equal to a Twitter flow, LinkedIn discussion panel, a Facebook panel, a Q&A forum, Stack Overflow list, or a frequent last question list. So we are getting used to presenting content in this way, more and more. But we need the filters. We need the way to sort of filter the knowledge base. And these icons are sort of metaphorical to indicate that each answer has certain characteristics. So we can group and organize these answers and create these taxonomies. And here I have three examples of three. I'm using the word filter, taxonomy, and facet. To me now they are synonyms. So excuse me if I'm sort of using them, I use them interchangeably, even though some say that they are not synonyms. But example here, that we can categorize answers according to shape, size, and color. Of course, this is just example. This is not the taxonomies that we use as technical communicators, but just to give you sort of an example of what it means to create facets. So in the web knowledge base, I used to say, okay, I click on triangle, I want to see everything that is small, and well, yes, this is facet navigation. It has been around 10 years in e-commerce sites. Yes, you're using this on a daily basis. So my suggestion here is that we as technical communicators, we use the power of facet navigation from e-commerce sites together with the panel stream, social media kind of environment. We make them together to create web knowledge bases. That I think hopefully can make answers at least a little bit more easier to find. And it's also, I think, a good way to displaying content on small devices. Okay. So how do we go from our traditional book-oriented content to this more dynamic environment? How do we do it? That's the big question. Without starting from scratch, which no company can afford. without rewriting heavily or restructuring heavily? How can we reuse the investment that we already made? Without forcing companies to sort of chop up everything in topics. That shouldn't be necessary. Or I will propose one way of doing it. And in the book content, there's a lot of answers to many user questions that are available. So we need to sort of find them, identify them. So here we have a traditional user manual, a book. It could be a data map or FrameMaker file or InDesign file. And it has a main title and a chapter, subsections, etc. I mean, you know all about this. We're technical communicators, so this is what we do. Now, to identify the answers that are available here, we can do it in often two ways. One is to start from a methodology, like SESAM, the one I'm working on, and to predict user questions using a number of facet taxonomies. And then look into the legacy book content to see, is the answer available somewhere? And map it out. Maybe you find that, okay, there are some answers that we don't have any, there's questions that there is no answers to. Well, that's actually good to know then. And to do that, of course, we need a view of this user behavior. What kind of questions do users ask? That's very important. The other approach would be to start from looking into each user manual and go through section by section and identify, okay, what kind of question is this snippet answering, sort of reverse engineering. And you will populate a list of questions which you can then use switch card sorting to group to create these taxonomies. Either way, you would identify that there are answers on certain levels. So here we have colored sections here would then equal to identified answer. But of course, these first four indicate that it is the leaf, lowest section that corresponds to a user question. And that, of course, is not always the case. It can be higher up in the hierarchy. So we need a way to map out and say that this node here corresponds to a user question. And maybe then rewrite or add this user's question in the title, using conditions, for instance. And then when we deploy this to the web knowledge base, this would create this pile of answers, which could then be equal to Twitter flow. So this is one way of doing it, but that is only half the job. We also need to create these classifications. And here I'm using another word, controlled vocabulary. Sometimes this is a little bit confusing, all this terminology around taxonomy facets, controlled vocabulary, filters. Here I'm assuming that we have developed two facets here. We have the information type and product type. So we have task concept, and this company here has two models. So what we need to do in the book file is to classify each and every answer. And this way of doing it has similarities to the data subject scheme, the classification domain. We add metadata in would then be an XML file. In this case, in section 1 here, all the answers are task-oriented instructions. In this case, you can set the classification information type.task on the highest level, and all the children will inherit this classification. And equally, in section 2, all these answers are conceptual, so we add it on a high level. This means that we don't need to set classification on each and every answer or topic. And similarly, we can then set on any level this classification. And with deploy, this will be these tags, these taxonomy values will be added to knowledge base, which allows the user to filter. And the classification here makes that the content is more semantically enriched. We're talking about intelligent content. It actually helps also the writer to understand what kind of answer it is. So providing this kind of metadata is a way to actually, I would claim, help the writer also understand what is supposed to be written here. And these control vocabulary is sort of the backbone of the information architecture. It can be added to all the user manuals to creating a consistent architecture. Okay. So let's dig into, look into how this could be. So here, this is the CMS, and here I prepared 2 publications. And these can be published to traditional PDFs. So let me just say, okay, I can publish. So you can see these are doesn't contain a lot of content. So these are also, of course, demo publications. So this is, well, traditional PDF. You see here it has some content like this. And this here is even more. It just contains 3 sections or 3 topics, if you like. So it's very shallow. This is XML, so I can open this in the integrated editor and can expand. So this is the way how the XML content is, how it works in the editor. And this is XML, and here we're using a vocabulary which is very similar to the Data Lightweight version, which is soon to be released mid next year as part of, well, similar to Data 1.3. So what I've done here is that I can show you this is metadata. So this particular how do I section here has this taxonomic classification here, as you can see. And accordingly, I've just added this similar to what I showed you in the image. So we have troubleshoot, and this is concept. So let's deploy this to the web knowledge base. And do it like this, and then we're done. Let me just reload to give you an idea of and of course now. So here we see the information type taxonomy, and we have task, concept, and troubleshoot, which is then, it comes from this XML file, which is the book content. So of course here I can expand and look at the content like this. I hope you get the idea that this is like this. We haven't actually chopped up this in topics. Of course this is still available as the book paradigm. Now I have the demo publication number 2 here, which has, well, similar 3 sections, but we have some subsections here. And here we actually classify these to this product type model 1 and 2. So let me deploy these 2. So I'll select the parent, and now I'm using the offline version, so I'm deploying to my local computer. So now we also have the product type taxonomy visible here as well, which allows me to say, okay, I want to see everything that is model 1. And in this case, there was no answers or topics that were classified to model 1 and task and troubleshoot. But I have reference here, for instance, And in this case here, we have the links, so I can follow the links like this. So this is basically the content deployed directly from the book content. I can publish, of course, and update the content, publish the PDF in parallel. And as the classification is added as metadata on all these sections, if I move a section, I don't lose anything, I don't lose the classification. Now there's a difference between internal classification and external classification. What I'm using here is internal classification. Okay, so that is sort of, I hope you get an idea of the basic concept of reusing and publishing book content. Now, of course, this has a lot of challenges, and I would like to sort of mention some lessons learned while working with this approach. One is we're talking about reuse and conditionalizing content. I think that's very interesting. We, as technical communicators, we are very focused on reusing content, not to reuse single source. But in this paradigm, where we classify everything, deploy everything, there's no books. So what is it that we reuse? Reuse is often between books. But this approach here is that we classify everything, deploy it, and then let the user filter and find the answers. And this is sort of a shift in perspective, I think, since this book paradigm means that we create an installation manual, we put conditions, and we publish it for this type of product and this type of user, and we decide, we as technical communicators, we decide what this user is supposed to need. But this installation person can ask questions that are, we think is completely irrelevant, which is not available in the installation manual. This approach puts another perspective that let this installation person see everything and filter. You can then create accounts, so we have pre-filtering. That is, of course, possible. And it's also related to using conditions. So this puts a little bit less emphasis on reusing, the complexity of reusing. On the other hand, it may increase the complexity of working with these taxonomies and classification. Now, I also said that we can start from our book content and publish it directly without rewriting or restructuring. Well, there is, of course, some work to deploy content to such a web knowledge base. The titles, something that probably you need to consider how they are formulated. It could be good to provide a context in the beginning to help the user judge relevance. And also the linking strategy is something that you will need to look into, probably. This depends on how your book content is currently structured. It could also be the case that you find that in a certain topic or section you have several answers, so you need to break it up into individual sections. And also there is an ongoing discussion of what is a topic. It's an interesting, my latest blog post was actually discussing what is a topic. In this case, a topic is an answer to a user question, which can be high level, low level. But there is this talk about a topic can be, and every page is page one topic, which is something bigger. And you can create those kind of topic here as well. That's up to you actually, and how you understand your uses and the behavior. And one other lessons learned working with this approach is that publishing several user manuals to one knowledge base could actually increase the user experience or creating a unified structure. So if you define the controlled vocabulary, these taxonomies, really well, they can be, I think they can leverage the user experience, since content that is created by different writers in different times, now they can be sort of gathered under the same umbrella, same look and feel. So that could be a benefit. And also, some lessons learned is working with short answers. So almost all answers are really short, but using links to help users find answers to follow-up questions is one strategy instead of creating big topics. But of course, that's up to you as technical communicators to decide on your strategy. So that was basically everything that there's of course a lot of details to this, but this is what I intended to cover. So I guess there is some time for questions. So I think first.
These user questions, I can see them working really well in a consumer product. In a business-to-business product, they might end up like Clippy being really irritating example, if someone's looking for the engine diagram and they have to go through the whole, what does it look like when I look inside the engine? And has there been any research done on how appropriate these questions are for that kind of user?
I think one, from my point of view, it depends on if the user is in a learning mode, wanting to learn something, or just get a short answer to something. There can be a difference in that case. And if the user is up to learning something and I want to actually sit down to learn, then the book maybe is more suitable. So I believe that we shouldn't actually just skip the book paradigm. It has a purpose and it must be there. So some users prefer to use the traditional books. This is one way of adding another channel to publish. Certain users has a preference for finding answers like this, and some has not. So I think we shouldn't use one or the other, should use both. So I guess in that case, it could be that user is looking for the book.
We've trained our users to think in one specific way, especially business to business. Now, consumers are changing, but how quickly or slowly is business to business going to change?
Yeah, that's a good question. It of course depends on the context and market and industry. Some are more controversial, sort of conservative. So I see that there's a trend moving towards this direction, but how fast the move is, that probably depends on product, user, market, etc. So that's a good question. That I think we had a question from.
I just saw when you opened the XML editor that there were some sections and para and so on. I thought, okay, that's looking like coming from Cockbook or something like that. But are you using like topic-based authoring methodology like concept, class, preference, or is it a mixture? So I didn't catch that.
That's a good question. We have the DTD, the vocabulary is called Flex. It's called the Flex DTD, and it's been around since the end of 80s, coming from the military from the beginning. But it is very generic DTD that has 30, 35 elements, something like that. And it's very similar to the Data Lightweight initiative. So our idea is, in Excosoft, is evolution and not revolution. We need to have a easy DTD that users it's easy to convert your legacy, to get into, and get started. And then you can add semantics as you learn. So it's evolution and not revolution. That is sort of one of our core values. So we have something called wrappers. So you can actually add or semantically enrich your elements, the section, to be whatever kind of. So you can have task, concept, reference, which you can add later on, actually. So it's kind of a specialization built in the environment. And we also support to use, we can use what we call include documents. So you can actually break out a certain part and put it in an own XML file and then reference it. So we can create this topic-based environment as well. So that's of course one way of doing it. Yes?
You said that users don't like manuals or don't like to read manuals, but I wonder if they like to follow links. And you said that when the user gets an answer to his question, that raises probably more questions and he wants to find more answers. So the issue of navigating in the structure is important. And you read something and say, oh, I read that moments ago. Where is that other answer that I just read?
Yeah. Of course, a web knowledge-based support, you can get your history, so you can see which are the answers that I actually have explored. So that's kind of, that's one type of filtering, actually. I can show it here, but that's something that should be available. So you can actually see, okay, give me a list of all the answers that I have looked at today, sort of like a history in your web browser. That could be one way to help the user to sort of, because the user would explore this information environment. I think this explorative discovery behavior is something that we need to support. Similar to that, we discover and test a product. We actually test and discover this environment. And one idea behind the design of this web knowledge base is to not put the user in information lostness. Because if you click on links and you get a totally new page that is completely transformed, and then you click a link there, and then you get a new page which is totally new design, you get information lostness. So you lose yourself, your orientation. That is, I think, is not very good. So yeah, but if this is better, I don't know, but that's one way of doing it. Yeah.
When you create a manual in a paper format, for example, you can use the sequence. So for example, you put in the beginning the safety instruction or what is important to read in the beginning. In a hypertextual approach, so if you have page 3, 4, 5, 7 with something you have to read, you start from the beginning and read those. If you, when you consider a hypertextual approach, is there a way to constrain someone to read something before consuming other content?
That's a good question. Yeah, you could put in business tools. And I think about this guided navigation. That could be one way, because the user is in the guided view forced to do a number of selections before another selection. So that could be one way. Another way could be to create bigger topics that an answer actually contains the whole set. It's not chunked up in smaller pieces. There's no links between. So I guess that could be one way of sort of more restraining the user to clicking around too much. That's a good question. That I think this is sort of a little bit of a delicate problem to force users into something. That is because the reaction can be that they leave the environment and do something else and turn to an unofficial source which provides completely wrong information. So it's a delicate balance. I think user tests are very important here, part of evaluating if it works or not. Okay, are you eager for lunch? Okay, very good. Then if there's no further questions, thank you.